Please welcome Tori and her talk on equity in the environment.
The other day, I was driving back from a great day on the slopes with a friend, and our conversation turned naturally to a popular post-ski topic, climate change. More specifically, what the heck can we do about it? And he said, well, we just need to take all gas-powered cars off the road in Colorado. And I was like, well, there's some things I have to say about that in terms of its practicality, but I'm also an engineer, so I immediately went home and did this back of the envelope calculation to see what exactly we would save from that. And often that's how we think about climate change. We think about it in terms of the tons of CO2 saved, or the emissions pathways, or the stabilization triangles, or my favorite, energy efficiency rebate program realization rates. Shout out Navigant. But today I'm here not to talk about models or projections. I'm here to talk about climate change in terms of people. And I'm here to talk specifically about environmental equity and how we can start to incorporate that into our work. First, I want to define two terms, justice versus equity. Environmental justice looks at the deep structural parts of our society that causes inequities in the first place. Think of it as a previously locked gate, which is now open. Environmental equity, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily try to break that barrier down, but make sure that everyone can look over it. Just like this awesome graphic that I made. So thinking back to that car example, environmental justice would say, okay, if we're getting rid of all the cars that are gas powered, we should probably make sure that there's public transportation so that people don't have to drive cars in the first place. Environmental equity, on the other hand, would make sure that there's mechanisms so that all people of all income levels can purchase those electric vehicles. Today, I am going to be talking about climate equity. Maybe someone in the next Switch talk can talk about climate justice. But I like to think of climate equity as looking at all the numbers, but through a socioeconomic and cultural lens. The first thing that climate equity asks us to acknowledge is the fact that climate change affects different communities unequally. So you can see here in the US, people of color on average are exposed to higher levels of nitrogen dioxide than those that live in predominantly white communities. A project that I recently worked on, the San Antonio Climate Action Plan, takes this into account and created a climate equity screening mechanism to make sure that their solutions actually help solve that disparity in vulnerable populations instead of perpetuating it. Climate equity, second, realizes that certain solutions cater to people who typically are wealthy, politically active, and white. So you can see here, solar installation is much less common amongst people who are of low income and of color. In San Antonio, access to a car is actually something that differs a lot by race and ethnicity. And so we took this into account, and for our transportation solutions, looked more at, say, bus systems or increasing walking or biking paths instead of solely relying on electric vehicles. And finally, equity seeks to correct the fact that we don't have very many people from these communities as a part of the conversation. As we can see up here, a lot of these organizations that are actually talking about climate change don't incorporate those communities. That's why it's really important that the climate action plan that we created focused on engaging community members and carrying outreach out in both Spanish and English to reach those populations. Now let's look at an example that's a little bit closer to home. This is the expansion of the I70 project in Denver. It's a $1.2 billion project that has a lot of benefits. It increases transportation access, can create economic vitality, and increases our infrastructure. However, when we start to look at those neighborhoods that it's passing through, we find that they're predominantly Hispanic and Latino, and they also score pretty low on other equity indices, such as access to health care, morbidity and mortality rates, and median income. From an environmental perspective, Googling some of those neighborhoods, specifically Globeville and Elyria Swansea, come up with headlines like this that are showing us that not only are pollution levels high here, they're some of the highest in the country. These two things together sparked a lot of opposition. So environmental groups and community groups came together and even proposed some new solutions such as rerouting or public transportation. But since equity wasn't a part of that original decision-making process, these other solutions were never really considered. Luckily, there are a lot of organizations that are considering equity. In addition to the San Antonio Climate Action Plan that I worked on, 0 Hour, even the Green New Deal, the City of Portland, the People's Climate March, all are trying to create a society that's both environmentally sustainable and socially equitable. So I ask you guys as engineers and policymakers and entrepreneurs to step back from the numbers for a minute and think about not just the people that you're affecting, but also how you can incorporate those people's voices to create equitable climate solutions. Thank you.